The tyrant king laughed at the homeless woman, but her response surprised everyone. Part 1. The Cruel Jest. The autumn rain fell mercilessly upon the capital city of Drakenhold, turning the cobblestone streets into rivers of mud and despair. King Aldrich the Iron-Fisted sat upon his golden throne, surrounded by courtiers who laughed at his every word and trembled at his every frown. For 20 years he had ruled with an iron grip, extracting every copper from his subjects, while his palace walls grew ever higher, adorned with treasures stolen from conquered lands. On this particular day the king had grown bored with the usual entertainments. The jesters' jokes had grown stale, the musicians' melodies tedious. He demanded something new, something to amuse his jaded palate. "Bring me the most wretched creature from the streets," he commanded his guards. "I wish to see how low humanity can sink when stripped of all dignity." The guards exchanged nervous glances but dared not disobey. They ventured into the rain-soaked streets, past the merchants' quarter, where even the poorest had roofs over their heads, down to the forgotten alleys where only shadows dwelt. There, huddled beneath a broken cart, they found her. She was perhaps 30 winters old, though hardship had etched lines upon her face that spoke of many more. Her clothes were rags held together by mud and desperation. Her hair, once perhaps golden, hung in matted clumps around a face marked by hunger and sorrow. Yet her eyes held something the guards could not name. They were grey like storm clouds, and within them dwelt neither fear nor submission. "You there," the captain called. "The king commands your presence." The woman looked up slowly, rain streaming down her gaunt cheeks. "The king," she repeated, her voice hoarse from disuse. "What could a king want with one such as I? That is not for you to question. Come." She rose with surprising grace, despite her evident weakness. As they led her through the streets, people stared and whispered. Some recognized her, though they dared not speak her name aloud. Others saw only another victim of the king's cruel whims. The throne room fell silent as she entered. The nobles, dressed in silks and velvets, recoiled from her mud-caked presence. The king leaned forward on his throne, a smile playing at his lips like a cat observing a wounded mouse. "Behold," King Aldrich announced to his court, "see what becomes of those who fail to serve their purpose in my kingdom. Tell us, creature, what is your name?" The woman stood straight despite her obvious exhaustion. "I am called Sarah, your majesty." "Sarah," the king mocked, drawing out the syllables. "Such a pretty name for such a wretched thing. Tell us, Sarah, how does one become so thoroughly defeated by life? Were you always thus crawling in the mud like a worm?" The courtiers tittered nervously, awaiting the woman's humiliation. But Sarah did not cower. Instead, she raised her head and looked directly at the king, an act of defiance that caused several nobles to gasp. "Your Majesty asks how one becomes defeated," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Perhaps you should ask instead how a kingdom becomes so ill that its people must live as I do." The laughter died instantly. The king's face darkened like thunderclouds gathering over a mountain peak. "You dare!" he hissed. "I dare speak truth, your majesty, for what have I left to lose? You have taken everything from your people, their gold, their grain, their sons for your wars, their daughters for your pleasure. You sit upon a throne built from the bones of the starving and wonder why we grovel in the mud." "Silence!" the king roared, rising from his throne. "Guards, teach this wretch what happens to those who speak against their sovereign." But as the guards stepped forward, Sarah raised her hand. "Wait," she said, and there was something in her voice that made even the armored soldiers pause. "I have not finished speaking, and by the ancient laws of this land, even the lowest citizen may speak their piece before the throne once recognized." The king laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the hall. "Ancient laws? You think to invoke laws to me? I am the law." "You are king," Sarah agreed, "but even kings once answered to something greater. Have you forgotten the covenant of kings, signed by your great-grandfather? The promise that the crown would protect its people in exchange for their loyalty. Fairy tales and dust," the king spat. "The strong rule, the weak serve. That is the only law that matters." Sarah smiled then, and it was a terrible thing to behold, not cruel, but sad beyond measure. "Then you have already lost, Your Majesty. For strength without wisdom is merely violence, and violence begets violence until even the strongest fall." Enough of this philosophy. The king descended from his throne, his hand on his sword. "You speak prettily for a beggar. Were you perhaps once a scholar before you fell to the gutter?" "I was many things," Sarah replied quietly, "as were all who now suffer beneath your rule. The merchant whose goods you seized, he once brought prosperity to the kingdom. The farmer whose lands you burned, for refusing your taxes, she once fed thousands. The soldier you executed for showing mercy to enemies, he once defended our borders with honor." The king circled her like a predator, his boots clicking against the marble floor. "And what were you before you became nothing?" For the first time, Sarah hesitated. Then, so quietly that only those nearest could hear, she said, "I was someone who loved this kingdom, someone who believed in what it could be." "Love," the king mocked. "Love does not fill treasuries or win wars." "No," Sarah agreed, "but neither does cruelty build lasting kingdoms. Tell me, Your Majesty, when did you last walk among your people without guards? When did you last eat food not tested for poison? When did you last sleep without fear of assassination?" The king's face flushed red. "I fear nothing." "Then why do you surround yourself with guards? Why do you test your food? Why do you execute anyone who shows the slightest sign of defiance?" Sarah's voice rose, filling the throne room. "You rule through fear, but you yourself are ruled by it. You are a prisoner in your own palace, a slave to your own paranoia. I should kill you where you stand," the king growled. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "You should. It would be easier, but then you would never know." "Know what? Why I truly came here, why I allowed myself to be brought before you, why I stand here speaking words that mean my death, yet show no fear." The king paused, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "Then speak quickly, before I lose patience entirely." Sarah looked around the throne room, at the nobles who watched with a mixture of fear and fascination, at the guards who stood ready to strike, at the servants who cowered in corners. Then she looked back at the king. "I came to deliver a message," she said. "A message from the one you wronged most gravely, the one whose curse upon you has already begun to take root." The king laughed again, but there was a slight uncertainty in it. "Curses? Now you speak of magic. There is no magic in this world, only steel and gold." "No magic?" Sarah asked. "Then explain the dreams, Your Majesty." The color drained from the king's face. "What dreams?" "The ones that wake you screaming in the night. The ones where you see her face. The woman you condemned to burn 5 years ago. The healer who refused to poison your enemies." The throne room had gone deathly quiet. Even the rain outside seemed to pause in its falling. "How could you know of that?" the king whispered. "Because she was my sister," Sarah said, and now tears flowed freely down her cheeks. "Ilara the healer, whom you burned as a witch because she would not break her sacred oaths. With her dying breath, she spoke words in the old tongue, words that even you, in all your arrogance, could not ignore." She cursed me?" "She prophesied," Sarah corrected. "She said that your kingdom would fall not by sword or siege, but by your own cruelty returning to you threefold. That one would come who knew your greatest secret, and that the truth would destroy you more thoroughly than any army." The king's hand trembled on his sword hilt. "And you claim to be that one?" "I claim nothing," Sarah said. "I merely observe. Tell me, Your Majesty, do the nobles here know about the night visits? Do they know about the locked room in the Eastern Tower?" Several courtiers exchanged confused glances, but the king had gone white as fresh parchment. "You know nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I know that every full moon you go alone to that tower. I know what you keep there. I know why you truly killed my sister, not for refusing to poison enemies, but for refusing to help you with your particular problem." "Silence!" the king roared. "Guards, seize her!" But as the guards moved forward, Sarah pulled something from within her rags, a small glass vial filled with liquid that seemed to glow with its own light. "One more step," she said calmly, "and I shatter this upon the floor. Do you recognize it, Your Majesty? Your court physician might. It's extract of moon's bane, concentrated enough that its vapor could reveal certain conditions to everyone present." The king held up his hand, stopping the guards. "What do you want?" "I want justice for my sister. I want justice for all who have suffered under your rule, but most of all," she paused, looking him directly in the eye, "I want you to know that your time is ending. The prophecy has already begun." Part 2. The Hidden Truth. That night, the king could not sleep. He paced his chambers like a caged beast, Sarah's words echoing in his mind. She had been dragged to the dungeons, but he had not dared execute her, not while she held that vial, not while she knew his secret, the thing that would destroy him if it became known. 25 years ago, before he was king, when he was merely Prince Aldrich, he had been different. Ambitious, yes, but not cruel. That had changed the night he met her. The woman in the woods, beautiful beyond mortal description, with eyes like molten gold and skin that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. She had offered him power, the strength to take the throne from his weak father, the ability to crush his enemies. The price had seemed small at the time. A few drops of blood, a whispered oath, a promise to meet her when the moon was full. He had not known what she truly was until it was too late. Not until the change had begun. The curse of the werewolf was not as the stories told. It was not a simple transformation under the full moon. It was a constant battle between man and beast, a hunger that never ceased, a rage that threatened to consume everything. Only through iron will and careful planning had he managed to hide it. The locked room in the Eastern Tower contained the chains he used to bind himself during the transformation. The court physician, sworn to secrecy under pain of death, provided him with potions to dull the symptoms, and when the hunger became too great, when he could no longer resist, that was why there were so many executions, why prisoners disappeared from the dungeons, why he had built his reputation on cruelty, better to be thought a tyrant than discovered as a monster. But Ilara had known. Somehow the healer had sensed what he was the moment she was brought before him. She had offered to help, to find a cure, but only if he would stop his reign of terror. He could not risk it, could not risk her telling anyone. So she had burned, and with her dying words she had cursed him. Or had she? Perhaps it was merely prophecy, as Sarah claimed. Perhaps his destruction had always been inevitable. A knock at his chamber door interrupted his brooding. "Your Majesty," came the voice of his Chancellor, Lord Garrett. "There is a situation." The king opened the door to find Garrett looking unusually pale. "What is it?" "The prisoner, Sarah. She's not in her cell." "What?" The king pushed past his Chancellor, striding toward the dungeons. "How is that possible?" "We don't know, sire. The guards swear they never left their posts. The locks are still intact, but she's simply gone." They descended into the dungeons, where confused guards stood before an empty cell. The chains that should have held Sarah lay on the floor, unopened but empty. "Search the castle," the king commanded. "Find her." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was futile. She was no ordinary woman. That much was clear. But what was she? Another cursed soul, a witch like her sister, or something else entirely? His answer came with the dawn. As the first rays of sunlight breached the horizon, a crowd began to gather in the courtyard below the palace. The king watched from his window as more and more people arrived. Merchants, farmers, craftsmen, beggars. They stood silently, all facing the palace, all waiting. In the center of the crowd stood Sarah. She was transformed. Gone were the rags and mud. She wore a simple white dress that seemed to glow in the morning light. Her hair, clean and braided, shone like spun gold. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. They burned with an inner fire that was both beautiful and terrible. "King Aldrich!" she called, and her voice carried impossibly far, reaching every corner of the castle. "I call upon you to face judgment." The king's advisers urged him to ignore her, to send the guards to disperse the crowd, but he knew that would not work. Whatever game she was playing, he had to face it. He descended to the courtyard, flanked by his guards. The crowd parted before him, but their eyes held no fear, only expectation. "You escaped my dungeons through trickery and witchcraft," the king declared, "and now you stand here making demands. You shall burn as your sister did." "My sister burned for refusing to enable your monstrosity," Sarah replied. "But she left more than a curse, Aldrich. She left the truth, scattered like seeds among the people. They know what you are." The king's hand went to his sword. "They know nothing but lies and rumors." "Then let us test that," Sarah said. She pulled out another vial, this one filled with clear liquid, water from the sacred spring of Avaleth, blessed by the old gods. They say it reveals the true nature of anyone it touches. Will you submit to its test? "I submit to nothing," the king snarled. "Then you confirm your guilt," Sarah said, turning to the crowd. "Your king refuses the test of truth. What innocent man would fear blessed water?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The king felt the situation slipping from his control. "You want truth?" he shouted. "Here is truth. I have ruled this kingdom for 20 years. I have made it strong, wealthy, feared by all our enemies." "You have made it a prison," Sarah countered. "You speak of strength, but what strength is there in starving children? You speak of wealth, but whose wealth? The gold in your treasury comes from the sweat and blood of these people. You speak of fear. Yes, our enemies fear us, but so do our own citizens. Is that the legacy you want? My legacy is power," the king roared, drawing his sword, "and I will not have it challenged by a witch and a mob of peasants." He lunged at Sarah, but she moved with impossible speed, dodging his blade. The vial in her hand shattered against the ground, and the clear liquid spread across the stones. Where it touched the king's boots, steam rose. The king screamed, stumbling backward. Where the liquid had splashed on his skin, it burned, not with heat, but with a pain that went deeper than flesh. "It's not the water that burns you," Sarah said sadly. "It's the weight of your sins made manifest. Every life you've taken, every cruelty you've inflicted, every drop of innocent blood you've spilled, it all returns to you now." The king fell to his knees, his body convulsing. The crowd watched in horrified fascination as something began to change in him. His features twisted, becoming neither fully human nor fully beast, caught between his two natures. "Please," he gasped, reaching out to Sarah. "Make it stop." "I cannot," she said. "Only you can end this, Aldrich. Confess your crimes, release your prisoners, abdicate your throne. The curse can only be broken by true repentance." But the king's pride was stronger than his pain. "Never," he snarled, forcing himself to his feet. "I am the rightful king. I will not bow to anyone." That's when the second revelation came. Part 3. The Secret Bloodline. A voice rang out from the crowd. Old, cracked with age, but carrying an authority that made everyone turn. "Rightful king? You dare speak of rights, kinslayer?" An ancient woman pushed through the crowd, leaning heavily on a gnarled staff. She wore the robes of a court recorder, faded and patched, but unmistakable. Many recognized her as Marta, the former royal chronicler who had disappeared 15 years ago. "Marta," the king gasped. "You're dead. You died in the plague." "I fled," Marta corrected, "when I discovered what you had done, when I found the bodies." "What bodies?" Lord Garrett demanded, though his voice trembled. "The true heirs," Marta said. "King Theodoric had 3 sons, not 1. Aldrich was the youngest. The twins, Marcus and Damon, were hidden away for their protection during the War of 3 Crowns. They were to be revealed on their 18th birthday, when they would share the throne as the ancient law decreed." The crowd had gone deathly silent. Even the king's guards looked uncertain. "Lies," the king said, but his voice was weak. "I have the documents," Marta continued, pulling scrolls from her robes. "Birth records, witness testimonies, the king's own seal. The twins were murdered in their sleep 2 nights before their revelation ceremony, poisoned with wolf's bane, the same poison found in Prince Aldrich's chambers." "You cannot prove," the king began. But I can, another voice interrupted. A young man stepped forward from the crowd, pulling back his hood. He had the king's jaw, the same nose, but his eyes were kind where Aldrich's were cruel. I am Marcus, son of Prince Marcus, grandson of King Theodric. I am your nephew, uncle, and by rights of primogeniture, the true heir to this throne. The king stared in disbelief. Impossible. I killed... He stopped, realizing what he had almost confessed. You killed my father, Marcus said, but not before he had secretly married and fathered a child. My mother fled when she learned of the murders, raised me in exile, told me the truth of my heritage. I've been gathering proof, waiting for the right moment. And I, Sarah said, stepping forward, am Seraphina, daughter of Prince Daemon, granddaughter of King Theodric. She removed a chain from around her neck, revealing a royal seal that had been hidden beneath her rags. My mother was a healer in the palace. Yes, Ilara was my adoptive sister, but my true mother died giving birth to me. Ilara raised me, hid me, protected me. When you burned her, it wasn't just for refusing to help with your curse. It was because she knew who I truly was. The king looked between them, his face contorting with rage and fear. Even if this is true, I am still king. I have ruled for 20 years. The nobles support me. Do we? Lord Garrett stepped away from the king's side. I served you out of fear, Aldrich, not loyalty. If these two are truly the rightful heirs... One by one, the nobles in the courtyard began to kneel, not to the king, but to Marcus and Sarah. The guards lowered their weapons. No, the king roared, and the beast within him finally broke free completely. His body contorted, bones breaking and reshaping, fur sprouting as he transformed into a massive wolf, larger than any natural creature. The crowd screamed and scattered, but Sarah stood her ground. This is what our uncle truly is, she called out, a monster in more ways than one. The Wolf King lunged at her, but Marcus intervened, drawing a sword that gleamed with an unnatural light. That blade, the king growled, his voice distorted but still understandable. Where did you get that? From our grandfather's tomb, Marcus replied. The sword of truth, hidden there by those still loyal to the true bloodline. It was forged to fight creatures of darkness, creatures like you. The battle was fierce but brief. The cursed king, for all his monstrous strength, could not stand against the combined might of the rightful heirs and the blessed blade. As the sword pierced his heart, he transformed back into his human form, lying broken on the courtyard stones. Please, he whispered, looking up at Sarah and Marcus. I only wanted to be strong, to be remembered. You will be remembered, Sarah said sadly, kneeling beside him, as a cautionary tale of what happens when power corrupts absolutely. But then the dying king smiled, a cold, terrible smile. You think you've won. You know, nothing. The curse wasn't from your sister girl, it was older, and it passes through blood. Part 4. The Darker Revelation. As King Aldrich breathed his last, a change came over both Sarah and Marcus. They gasped, clutching their chests, as a burning sensation spread through their veins. What's happening? Marcus cried out, dropping the sword of truth. Old Marta hobbled forward, her face grave. No, it cannot be. The curse of succession. What curse? Sarah demanded, fighting against the pain. There's more to the story, Marta said urgently. King Theodric, your grandfather, he wasn't just a king. He made a pact with an ancient entity to win the throne from his own father. The curse passes to all who share his blood. When one cursed king dies by the hand of his blood relatives, the curse transfers to them. You knew, Marcus accused, glaring at the old woman. You knew, and you let us. I hoped it was just a legend, Marta admitted, or that the curse had died with Aldrich. But I see now. The entity's reach is longer than we imagined. Sarah forced herself to stand, her body trembling. There must be a way to break it. Ilara studied the old magics. She left journals hidden in the ruins of the ancient library. The library that Aldrich burned? Lord Garrett asked. No, Sarah said. The one beneath it. The true library, built in the time of the first kings. Ilara showed me the entrance before she died. If answers exist, they'll be there. Marcus nodded, then addressed the crowd. People of Drakenhold, we have freed you from a tyrant, but our work is not done. We must ensure this curse ends with us. Until we return, Lord Garrett and the Council of Nobles will oversee the kingdom's recovery. Release all prisoners, return seized property, open the grain stores to feed the hungry. The crowd cheered, but Sarah and Marcus exchanged worried glances. They could feel the curse taking root, whispering dark thoughts, promising power if they would only embrace it. They set out that very hour, accompanied by a small group of loyal guards and Marta, who insisted on coming despite her age. The journey to the ruins took 3 days, during which both heirs fought constantly against the curse's influence. "It wants us to fight each other," Marcus said one night by the campfire. "I can feel it, pushing me to see you as a threat." "I know," Sarah replied. "It's showing me visions of ruling alone, of having absolute power. We must stay united, or we'll end up like Aldrich." The ancient library was hidden beneath what appeared to be nothing more than rubble and overgrowth. But Sarah remembered Ilara's instructions, and soon they found the concealed entrance. The passages below were dark and musty, filled with the weight of centuries. They searched for days through countless scrolls and tomes, many written in languages long dead. Finally, in the deepest vault, they found what they were looking for, a black book bound in scales, with a lock that required blood to open. When Sarah's blood touched the lock, the book sprang open, revealing text that seemed to write itself as they watched. "The Chronicle of the Crimson Pact," Marta read aloud. "Here is recorded the true history of the Drakenhold curse." The story it told was worse than they had imagined. The entity that had granted power to their bloodline was called the Crimson Shadow, a being from before the world's making. It fed on suffering, growing stronger with each act of cruelty committed by those who bore its mark. King Theodric had not just made a pact for himself, he had sold the souls of all his descendants, ensuring the entity would have an eternal source of sustenance. "Every king of our line has fed this thing," Marcus said in horror. "Every war, every execution, every moment of suffering, it all fed the Crimson Shadow." "But there's more," Sarah said, reading further. "The entity can be defeated, but the cost—" She trailed off, her face paling. "What?" Marcus demanded. "What's the cost?" "The curse can only be broken by a willing sacrifice. One of royal blood must offer themselves freely to the entity, not in service but in defiance. They must enter its realm and challenge it directly. If they win, the curse breaks. If they lose, their soul is consumed forever," Marta finished, "and the curse grows stronger." Marcus stood immediately. "Then I'll go, as the eldest heir." "Age means nothing to this creature," Sarah interrupted, "and you have a wife, children waiting for you in exile. I'll go. You think I would let you sacrifice yourself while I—" Their argument was interrupted by laughter, cold, inhuman laughter that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Such noble hearts," a voice like grinding stone spoke. "How refreshing after decades of Aldrich's selfishness. But why must you choose? Why not rule together as cursed kings and queen? I can give you power beyond imagining." The Crimson Shadow materialized before them, not fully, but as a suggestion of form. Smoke and shadow with eyes like burning coals, tentacles of darkness that reached toward them with promises of power. "Never," both heirs said in unison. "Then you will suffer as all who defy me suffer," the entity hissed. "The curse will consume you, drive you mad. You will become worse than Aldrich ever was. Unless we stop you first," Sarah said, stepping forward. "I challenge you, Crimson Shadow. Face me in your realm." "And I stand with her," Marcus added. "We are joint heirs, equal in claim. We challenge you together." The entity's laughter shook the entire library. "Together. That has never been done. The pact speaks of one sacrifice, one challenge. The pact speaks of royal blood challenging you," Marta said suddenly, her old voice cutting through the entity's laughter. "It doesn't specify how many, and these two share equal claim to the throne. By the laws of succession, they are one ruler divided in two bodies. The crimson shadow's form writhed in anger. Clever mortals, very well, but know that in my realm your unity will be tested. Your minds will be laid bare to each other. Every secret, every doubt, every dark thought will be revealed. Most who enter together destroy each other before they ever reach me. We'll take that risk, Sarah said firmly. Marcus nodded his agreement. How do we enter your realm? The entity gestured to a mirror that appeared in the wall, its surface black as night, reflecting nothing. Step through if you dare, but know that once you enter, only victory or death awaits. Part 5. The Realm of Shadows. Sarah and Marcus stood before the dark mirror, hands clasped tightly. Behind them, Marta and the guards waited anxiously. Whatever happens, Sarah said to them, if we don't return within 3 days, seal this place. Don't let anyone else find the entity. You will return, Marta said firmly. You must. Taking deep breaths, the two heirs stepped through the mirror together. The sensation was like drowning in ice water while being burned alive. They tumbled through nothingness, their minds assaulted by visions and whispers. Then suddenly they stood on solid ground. The Crimson Shadow's realm was a mockery of the mortal world. The sky was the color of blood, with no sun or moon, only a dim crimson glow that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. The ground beneath their feet was black glass that reflected distorted versions of themselves. Welcome, the entity's voice echoed around them, to the heart of suffering. Here, every pain ever inflicted by your bloodline has taken form. Can you face the weight of your family's sins? As if summoned by its words, figures began to materialize around them, ghostly forms of those who had died at the hands of Drakenhold kings. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of spirits, all bearing the wounds of their deaths. We didn't kill these people, Marcus said, though his voice shook. Your blood did, the spirits whispered in unison. Your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your uncle, and back through generations. We suffered for your family's power. Sarah stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. You're right. Our family has caused immeasurable suffering. We cannot undo what was done, but we're here to ensure it never happens again. Pretty words, one spirit spat, a woman holding a ghostly child. My son starved because your grandfather taxed us into poverty. Words won't bring him back. No, Sarah agreed, they won't. But ending this curse might prevent other mothers from suffering as you did. The spirits parted, creating a path forward. As Sarah and Marcus walked, they were forced to witness every cruelty. Executions, starvations, wars, all playing out in ghostly pantomimes around them. But worse than the external visions were the internal revelations. True to the entity's word, their minds began to open to each other. Marcus saw Sarah's deepest secret, that she had actually been in the capital for months before allowing herself to be captured, that she had poisoned several of Aldrich's supporters, causing their mysterious deaths. She was not as innocent as she appeared. Sarah saw Marcus's hidden shame, that he had once abandoned a village to bandits rather than risk revealing his identity, that he had watched from hiding as innocent people died, choosing his secret over their lives. You killed people, Marcus accused, pulling away from her. You let people die, Sarah shot back. This is what you are. The Crimson Shadow laughed, its form materializing before them, massive and terrible. Flawed, selfish, no better than those who came before. You judge Aldrich, but you carry the same darkness. For a moment the two heirs stood apart, glaring at each other. The entity's presence pressed down on them, magnifying every negative emotion, every doubt, every resentment. Then Sarah laughed, not with humor but with bitter understanding. You're right, we're flawed. We've made terrible choices. We're not pure heroes come to save the day. But, Marcus added, understanding dawning in his eyes, neither were we meant to be. We're human, with all that entails. The difference between us and Aldrich isn't that we're perfect, it's that we're trying to be better. They reached for each other again, and this time their grip was stronger for the honesty between them. You think acknowledgement of your flaws will save you, the entity roared. I am older than your world. I have fed on the suffering of millions. You are insects before me. The crimson shadow attacked, tendrils of darkness lashing out with the force of hurricanes. But Sarah and Marcus stood firm, their joined hands glowing with a light neither understood, but both trusted. You're old, Sarah agreed, dodging a tendril that would have impaled her. But you're also limited. You can only exist through the suffering you cause. Without it, you're nothing. And we choose to break that cycle, Marcus declared. Not through our deaths, but through our lives. We refuse to feed you. Then you will die here, the entity shrieked. The battle that followed existed partially in the physical realm and partially in the realm of will. The crimson shadow threw every temptation at them, visions of absolute power, of their enemies kneeling, of wealth beyond measure. When that failed, it tried fear, showing them futures where they failed, where the kingdom burned, where everyone they loved died horrible deaths. But for every attack, Sarah and Marcus had an answer. Not because they were unusually strong or brave, but because they were together, each supporting the other when one faltered. You want to know the real secret? Sarah said as they pressed forward against the entity's assault. Ilara didn't curse Aldrich. She blessed him. What? Both Marcus and the entity said simultaneously. She gave him the chance for redemption. Every full moon, when he transformed, he could have chosen to resist the bloodlust, to chain himself, to protect others. The curse only controlled him because he let it. He chose to be a monster long before you marked him. The entity's form wavered. Impossible. The curse is absolute. No curse is absolute, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. You're not as powerful as you pretend. You're a parasite, feeding on the choices of others, and we choose to starve you. They pressed their attack, not with weapons but with will. Every step forward was a choice to reject the entity's influence. Every breath was a defiance of its power. The crimson shadow grew smaller, its form less distinct. You cannot. I am eternal. You are ended, Sarah and Marcus said together. With their joined hands, they reached out and touched the entity's core, a small, pulsing thing like a corrupted heart. It burned their flesh, sent agony through every nerve, but they held on. We don't destroy you with our sacrifice, Sarah gasped through the pain. We destroy you with our choice to live differently. Every good act we perform, every kindness we show, every just decision we make, Marcus added, diminishes you. The entity shrieked, a sound that threatened to shatter their minds, but then suddenly silence. The crimson shadow collapsed into itself, becoming smaller and smaller until it was nothing but a single point of darkness. Then even that winked out. Part 6. The Price of Victory. Sarah and Marcus found themselves back in the ancient library, collapsed on the floor. Marta and the guards rushed to them, helping them sit up. Is it done? Marta asked urgently. The entity is destroyed, Sarah confirmed, though her voice was weak. But she and Marcus looked at each other. They could feel it. Something fundamental had changed within them. The curse was broken, yes, but breaking it had required them to take the entity's darkness into themselves and transform it. We can never rule, Marcus said quietly. We've absorbed too much of the entity's essence. We destroyed it, but its power had to go somewhere. If either of us took the throne, we risk becoming what we fought against. Then what do we do? Lord Garrett asked. The kingdom needs leadership. Sarah smiled weakly. The kingdom needs good leadership. That doesn't have to come from royal blood. Over the following weeks, they worked to establish a new system. A council elected from among the people. Merchants, farmers, craftsmen, scholars. No single ruler, but a group that could balance each other, prevent any one person from accumulating too much power. Sarah and Marcus became advisors, using their knowledge and experience to guide, but never to rule. They established schools where children could learn not just letters and numbers, but ethics and empathy. They created healers' halls, where Ilara's knowledge could be preserved and shared. but they also knew they carried danger within them. The entity's essence, while transformed, was still present. They could feel it sometimes, the whisper of power, the temptation to take control. One night, a year after Aldrich's death, they stood together on the palace walls, looking out over a kingdom that was slowly healing. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked. "We could have been king and queen. We could have been tyrants," Sarah corrected. "Look at them." She gestured to the city below, where lanterns created constellations of light, where laughter could be heard from taverns, where children played in streets that had once run with blood. "Isn't this better?" But their peace was not to last. A messenger arrived at dawn, bearing news from the northern borders. An army approached, massive, disciplined, bearing the banners of the Empire of Morvanth. Emperor Cassius the Conqueror had heard of Drakenhold's political upheaval and saw opportunity. A kingdom without a king, he reasoned, would fall easily. The council convened in emergency session. Some advocated for immediate surrender, hoping for mercy. Others wanted to fight, though their army was a fraction of the Empire's size. "There is another way," Sarah said quietly, "but you won't like it." "Speak," Lord Garrett urged. "Marcus and I still carry the entity's power. We've suppressed it, contained it, but it's there. If we released it, controlled it, we could defend the kingdom." "But at what cost?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Once we unleash that power, we might not be able to contain it again. We could save the kingdom, but become the very monsters we sought to prevent." The council debated through the night, but in the end, the choice was made for them. The Empire's army arrived at dawn, surrounding the capital. Emperor Cassius himself rode to the gates, demanding surrender. "Bring out your leaders," he commanded. "Let them kneel before me, and I may show mercy." Sarah and Marcus walked out to meet him, not in royal garb, but in simple clothes. "You?" the emperor laughed. "The former heirs who gave up their throne? This will be easier than I thought." "We gave up the throne," Sarah said, "but not our responsibility to protect these people." "With what army?" Cassius mocked. "I have 50,000 soldiers. You have farmers with pitchforks." "We have something else," Marcus said quietly. "Something we hoped never to use." They joined hands once more, and this time, when they called upon the power within them, they didn't resist it. The darkness that had been the Crimson Shadow's essence flowed out, but transformed by their will into something else. Not evil, but not entirely good either. Power in its rawest form. The sky darkened, the ground trembled, shadows rose from the earth itself, forming into warriors of living darkness. "Impossible," the Emperor breathed. "We offer you one chance," Sarah said, her voice echoing with otherworldly power. "Leave, now, never return." But Cassius was too proud, too confident in his numbers. "Attack," he commanded. The battle was brief but terrible. The Shadow Warriors couldn't be killed by normal weapons. They moved through the Empire's ranks like a plague of darkness, not killing but disarming, terrifying, breaking the enemy's will to fight. Within an hour, the Empire's army was in full retreat, the Emperor himself fleeing on horseback. But the cost was immediately apparent. Sarah and Marcus stood in the aftermath, the power still flowing through them, whispering its seductive promises. "We could chase them," Marcus said, his eyes glowing with dark fire. "Ensure they never threaten anyone again." "We could expand," Sarah added, her voice dreamy. "Bring our justice to other kingdoms. End all tyrants everywhere." "No," they said together, fighting against the power's influence. It took all their combined will to pull the shadows back, to contain the power once more. When they finally succeeded, they collapsed, aged years in moments. "We can't do that again," Sarah gasped. "Next time, we might not be able to stop," but fate seemed determined to test them. Final part, the ultimate choice. 5 years passed. Drakenhold prospered under the Council's leadership, becoming a beacon of hope in a world still largely ruled by kings and emperors. Sarah and Marcus lived quietly, teaching, healing, trying to atone for their bloodline sins, while keeping their dangerous power contained. Then came the plague. It started in the eastern provinces, a sickness unlike any seen before. People fell ill by the hundreds, then thousands. Normal healing failed. Prayers went unanswered. The disease spread with terrible speed, reaching the capital within weeks. Sarah, trained by Ilara in the healing arts, worked tirelessly to find a cure. Marcus organized quarantines, supply lines, anything to slow the plague's spread, but nothing worked. Then, old Marta, now confined to her bed by age, called them to her. "I've seen this before," she wheezed. "In the old texts. It's not a natural plague. It's the last curse of the Crimson Shadow." "But we destroyed it," Marcus protested. "You destroyed its consciousness, its will, but entities like that, they don't die cleanly. This plague is its death throes, one final attempt to cause suffering." "How do we stop it?" Sarah demanded. Marta's eyes were sad. "The same way you stopped the entity itself, the power you absorbed. It's the only thing that can counter the plague. But using it means risking everything we've fought to prevent," Marcus finished. They had days to decide. The plague was spreading exponentially. Soon, not just Drakenhold, but all the surrounding kingdoms would be infected. Sarah and Marcus stood once more on the palace walls, watching funeral pyres burn throughout the city. "We have to," Sarah said quietly. "I know," Marcus agreed. "But this time, one of us needs to stay anchored. One uses the power. One pulls them back. The one who uses it might not come back. The power is stronger now, fed by 5 years of suppression." They looked at each other, both knowing what had to be done, but neither wanting to say it. "Together," they said finally. "We do it together, as we always have. Either we both come back, or neither does." They gathered the council, explained the situation. "If we don't return ourselves," Sarah said, "if we return as something else, you must stop us, whatever the cost." Lord Garrett, aged but still strong, nodded grimly. "We'll do what must be done." Uki, in the central square, where Aldrich had once mocked a homeless woman, Sarah and Marcus prepared for their final gambit. The sick were gathered in the surrounding buildings, thousands of them, dying by the hour. The two heirs joined hands one last time and released everything, all the power, all the darkness, all the transformed essence of the Crimson Shadow. But this time, instead of forming it into weapons or warriors, they shaped it into something else, a wave of pure life force, the opposite of the plague's death. The power fought them, tried to corrupt their intent, whispered of how they could rule not just the living but the dead, become gods of a new world. But they held to each other, held to their purpose, held to the memory of all who had suffered and all who might yet be saved. The healing wave spread out from them, washing over the city, the kingdom beyond. Where it touched, the plague burned away like morning mist. The sick rose from their beds. The dying drew breath. But the effort was too much. Sarah and Marcus felt themselves fragmenting, their consciousness scattering. The power wanted to consume them, make them into a new Crimson Shadow. "No," they said together, one last defiance. With the last of their will, they turned the power inward, not to destroy themselves, but to transform one final time. They pulled all the darkness, all the danger, all the corrupting influence into themselves and then let go. The explosion of light could be seen for miles. When it faded, Sarah and Marcus lay in the square, unconscious but breathing. They woke 3 days later to find the plague gone, the kingdom saved, and themselves changed. The power was gone, not suppressed, not contained, but truly gone. They had burned it out completely, used every last drop to heal rather than harm. They were mortal, normal, free. "It's over," Sarah said, hardly believing it. "Our family's debt is paid," Marcus agreed. But Marta, sitting by their bedside, smiled mysteriously. Not quite. She pulled out an ancient scroll, one they had never seen before. This was hidden in the deepest vault, protected by magic that only broke when the entity died completely. "It's a message from your grandfather," King Theodoric, written before his death. The message was brief. To my descendants who break the curse, I knew what I was doing when I made the pact. I saw a future where our kingdom would fall to barbarism, where hundreds of thousands would die in wars and famines. The entity offered power, yes, but also prophecy. It showed me that one day, two of my bloodline would rise above the curse, would transform darkness into light, would save not just our kingdom, but many others. The price was terrible, generations of tyranny and suffering, but the alternative was extinction. I pray you can forgive an old man's desperate choice. Use what you have learned. Lead not through power, but through wisdom. The curse was never meant to last forever. It was meant to create you. Sarah and Marcus sat in stunned silence. He knew, Marcus finally said. All of this, it was planned. Not planned, Marta corrected. Hoped for. He gambled everything on the possibility that good could come from evil, that his bloodline would eventually produce those strong enough to break free. But all those who suffered, Sarah began, would have suffered anyway according to the prophecy. The entity didn't lie. It showed true futures. Your grandfather chose the path where suffering had purpose, where it would eventually end. It was a terrible revelation, one that would haunt them, but it also freed them in a way. Their grandfather, their uncle, even the entity itself, all had played roles in a story larger than any of them had understood. 20 years later, Sarah and Marcus stood once again in the square, now transformed into a garden. Children played where blood had once been spilled. The kingdom of Drakenhold had become a republic, its council system adopted by neighboring nations. Sarah had married a scholar and had 3 children. Marcus had become a teacher, passing on hard-won wisdom. Neither had touched power again, nor wanted to. Do you ever wonder, Marcus asked, if we made the right choices? Sarah looked at the statue that had been erected, not of them, but of all who had died during the years of tyranny, a reminder of the cost of power. We made the only choices we could, she said. Right or wrong, we chose to try, to be better. In the end, that's all anyone can do. A young girl ran up to them, Marcus's daughter named Ilara, after the woman who had saved them all through her sacrifice. Uncle Sarah, she said, for she had never quite gotten the hang of aunt. Tell us the story again, the one about the homeless woman who surprised everyone. Sarah smiled, lifting the girl up. Once upon a time there was a cruel king who thought power made him strong. One day he mocked a woman who had nothing. But she had something he didn't. She had truth and courage, and the knowledge that real strength comes not from what you can take, but from what you're willing to give up. As she told the story, edited for young ears, Sarah thought about how it would be passed down through generations, changing with each telling. Perhaps one day it would become myth, the details lost, but the lesson remaining. Power corrupts, but redemption is always possible. The greatest victory is not in defeating your enemies, but in choosing not to become them. And sometimes the most surprising response to cruelty is not revenge, but the patient, difficult work of building something better. The kingdom of Drakenhold never had another king. It didn't need one. It had something better. People who had learned that true leadership meant service, that strength meant lifting others up, and that the greatest power of all was the power to choose compassion over cruelty, wisdom over force, and hope over fear. And in the annals of history, it would always be remembered that it all began when a tyrant laughed at a homeless woman, never knowing that her response would change the world. In the end, Sarah had been right in her first words to the king. Violence begets violence until even the strongest fall. But she had also discovered another truth. Kindness begets kindness. Justice begets justice. And even the smallest act of courage can topple the mightiest throne. The curse of the Drakenhold bloodline was broken not through force or magic, but through choice. The choice to be better, to sacrifice for others, to transform inherited darkness into hard-won light. And perhaps that was the greatest surprise of all. that in a world of ancient curses and dark entities, of tyrant kings and magical swords, the most powerful force was still the simple human capacity to choose good over evil, even when that choice came at the greatest personal cost. The garden where the square had been became a place of pilgrimage, where people came to remember that even the humblest person could stand up to tyranny, that even the most corrupted bloodline could produce heroes, and that even the darkest curse could be broken by those willing to face the truth about themselves and choose to be better. Sarah lived to be 93, Marcus to 91. They died within days of each other, peacefully, surrounded by grandchildren who knew them not as the heirs who broke an ancient curse, but simply as the old storytellers who taught that every person, regardless of birth or station, had within them the power to change the world. Their last words, spoken to those gathered at their bedsides, were the same they had lived by. Remember, it's not about the power you have, but how you choose to use it. And sometimes, the greatest use of power is choosing not to use it at all. The tyrant king had laughed at a homeless woman. Her response had indeed surprised everyone. But the greatest surprise was not her royal blood or hidden power. It was her proof that anyone, even someone who had lost everything, could stand up to injustice and win, not through violence but through truth, courage, and an unshakable belief that the world could be better. And it was. Basil's epilogue, the scholar's discovery. 100 years after the death of Sarah and Marcus, a young scholar named Tyrant was researching in the National Archive of the Republic of Drakkenhold. He was writing what he hoped would be the definitive history of the fall of the monarchy. In a dusty corner, behind a fallen shelf, he found a journal that had been missed by previous historians. It was written in Ilara the Healer's hand, dated just days before her execution. The final entry read, "Tomorrow I burn. Uldric thinks he kills me for refusing to help with his curse, for protecting Sarah's identity. But there is one more secret, one I take to the flames. The Crimson Shadow never existed. I created the fiction, planted the evidence, wrote the ancient texts myself. Every word of prophecy, every detail of the curse, all of it my invention. I knew Uldric's nature. Knew he had killed his brothers, knew he would believe in a dark power that matched his own darkness. I knew, too, that Sarah and Marcus would need something to unite against, something that would force them to work together, despite their differences. They needed to believe they were fighting an ancient evil, to find the strength to fight the very real evil of tyranny and their own inherited capacity for cruelty. The plague I set in motion with my dying breath. A disease, yes, but one I knew could be cured by forcing them to push their bodies and minds to the absolute limit, to choose between power and healing. They would think they were burning out an entity's essence. In truth, they would be burning out their own addiction to power. King Theodoric's letter was my forgery, placed where it would be found when needed. He was no prophet, just another tyrant who raised a tyrant's son. But Sarah and Marcus needed to believe their suffering had meaning, that good could come from evil by design rather than mere chance. I die tomorrow, and with me dies the truth. Let the myth live. Let people believe in ancient curses and dark entities. The story serves its purpose. It teaches that power corrupts, that redemption is possible, that working together we can overcome any darkness. But you who find this someday know the real truth. There was no Crimson Shadow. There was only human choice. Uldric chose cruelty. Sarah and Marcus chose sacrifice. The council chose democracy. Each generation chose to be better than the last. That is the only magic that ever existed. The magic of human beings choosing to be better than their nature, to rise above their circumstances, to transform suffering into wisdom. I am Ilara, healer and liar, and I regret nothing. My deception saved a kingdom. My death saved 2 souls. And my lies became a truth more powerful than any magic could ever be. To whoever reads this, choose. Choose kindness. Choose justice. Choose hope. Not because an ancient curse demands it, not because prophecy proclaims it, but because it is right. The tyrant laughed at the homeless woman. She surprised everyone by showing them they had the power to surprise themselves. That is the only truth that matters. Tyrant stared at the journal for a long time. Then carefully, deliberately, he placed it in the archive's furnace and watched it burn. Some truths, he decided, were less important than the lessons learned from believing lies. The people needed their myth, their reminder that even the darkest powers could be overcome. As the last of Ilara's journal turned to ash, Theron went to the garden that had once been a square and looked at the statue of the forgotten victims. At its base, barely visible, were words he had never noticed before. Truth is what we make it worth believing in. He smiled, understanding at last. The homeless woman's response had surprised everyone, including herself. She had become what she pretended to be. The curse had been real because they believed it was real. The entity had existed in the only way that mattered, in the fears and choices of those who thought they fought it. And in the end, that was the greatest magic of all, that human beings could create their own destiny, write their own stories, and transform themselves through the sheer force of believing they could be better. The tyrant king was dead. The homeless woman was legend. And the kingdom that had once been built on cruelty now stood as proof that any ending could be rewritten, any curse broken, any tyrant overthrown by those brave enough to say, "We choose differently." And they did. Forever after, they did. The truth revealed. A final revelation. But Theron's story does not end with burning the journal. 3 days after his discovery, as he sat in his study writing his sanitized history, there came a knock at his door. An elderly woman stood there, bent with age, but with eyes sharp as winter stars. "You found it, didn't you?" she said without preamble. "Ilara's journal." Theron's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you mean." The woman smiled. "I am Vera, great-granddaughter of Sarah herself. Every generation one of us has known the truth. We watch, we wait. We ensure the secret is kept when needed, and revealed when the time is right." "The time isn't right," Theron said quickly. "The people need their myths." "Do they?" Vera interrupted. "Or is that just another comfortable lie? Come, young scholar, there is more to show you." Against his better judgment, Theron followed her through the twilight streets to an unremarkable house in the merchants' quarter. In the basement, behind a wall that swung open at her touch, lay a hidden archive. "Every generation of our family has kept records," Vera explained, lighting lanterns that revealed shelves upon shelves of documents. Not just of what happened, but of what almost happened. The other paths, the other choices. She pulled out a thick tome. Here, Marcus's private journals. He suspected the truth about the Crimson Shadow near the end, but chose to keep quiet. And here, another book. Sarah's correspondence with scholars across the continent, spreading the story, ensuring it would become legend. They knew, Theron breathed. They suspected. But more importantly, they understood that sometimes the lie that saves is more valuable than the truth that destroys. Each generation faces this choice, reveal the truth or preserve the myth. "And you're giving me this choice." Vera studied him carefully. "Tell me, Scholar Theron, what do you see when you look at our republic? Do you see a people freed by truth, or a people empowered by belief in their own capacity to overcome impossible odds?" Theron thought of the council meetings he'd observed, where former farmers debated with ex-nobles as equals. He thought of the schools where children learned not just facts, but empathy. He thought of the courts where justice was blind to birth and station. "I see," he said slowly, "a people who became what they believed they could become. Then you understand. The question is not whether the Crimson Shadow was real. The question is whether the transformation it caused was real. And that, young scholar, is undeniable." Vera turned to leave, then paused. "You have a choice to make. Reveal Ilara's deception and risk undermining the foundation of our republic's mythology, or guard the secret and perpetuate a lie. But remember, Ilara's greatest wisdom was understanding that the most powerful truths often wear the masks of fiction." After she left, Theron spent the night reading the hidden archive. He found letters from citizens across the Republic, describing how the story of Sarah and Marcus had inspired them to stand up to local tyrants, to help their neighbors, to choose hope over fear. By dawn, he had made his decision. He returned to the official archives and filed his history, one that spoke of curses and entities, of ancient evils overcome by human will. But in the margin of his personal copy, he wrote a single line: "The greatest magic is making people believe they have magic within themselves." 50 years later, when Theron lay dying, he called his own granddaughter to his bedside and told her of the hidden archive. And so the secret passed on, generation to generation, a truth preserved precisely because it was never told. Meanwhile, in the schools and homes of the Republic, parents continued to tell their children the story of the tyrant king who laughed at a homeless woman, and how her response surprised everyone. They spoke of ancient curses and dark entities, of heroes who chose sacrifice over power. And the children, hearing these tales, grew up believing that even the humblest among them could stand against tyranny, that even the darkest curse could be broken by courage and unity. They believed it so deeply that they made it true in their own lives, over and over again. Perhaps that was Ilara's true genius, not the elaborate deception itself, but her understanding that people need not facts, but faith, not histories, but hopes, not truths, but the conviction that they can transform themselves and their world. The Crimson Shadow might never have existed, but the light that people found in opposing it was absolutely real. And in the end, is there any difference between a lie that saves and a truth that redeems, between a myth that inspires heroism and a fact that demands it, between believing you can change the world and actually changing it? These questions echoed through the centuries, asked by each guardian of the secret, answered only in the living reality of a republic that thrived because its people believed, truly believed, that they had once overcome an impossible darkness and could do so again whenever necessary. The tyrant king had laughed at the homeless woman, expecting submission or despair. Her response had been to create a story so powerful that it rewrote reality itself, transforming a kingdom of oppression into a republic of hope. She had surprised everyone, including herself, by proving that the greatest power is not in controlling others, but in inspiring them to control themselves, to choose justice over advantage, mercy over revenge, truth over comfort. But the ultimate surprise, the one that only a handful would ever know, was that the greatest truth of all was a lie, a beautiful, necessary, transformative lie that became true through being believed. In the garden where the square had been, new flowers bloomed each spring, children played where blood had once spilled, and somewhere, in a hidden archive, the real truth waited patiently, knowing it was less important than the legend it had birthed. For in the end, the measure of a story is not its factual accuracy, but its power to change lives. And by that measure, the tale of the tyrant king and the homeless woman was the truest story ever told. True because it made people true to their better natures, true because it turned suffering into wisdom, true because it proved that even nothing, even homelessness, even complete powerlessness could become everything if one only had the courage to speak truth to power. And so the story continues, told and retold, each generation adding their own understanding, their own struggles, their own triumphs. The tyrant king remains forever frozen in that moment of cruel laughter. The homeless woman stands eternal in her dignity and defiance. And between them, in that space where cruelty meets courage, where power meets principle, where fear meets hope, the entire future of humanity hangs in balance, waiting for each of us to choose which side we stand on. Choose wisely, choose bravely, choose as if the fate of the world depends upon it, because it does. It always has. It always will.